What happens when split-second judgments collide with hidden truths? Tonight's story will challenge everything you think you know about assumptions, prejudice, and the power of looking beyond the surface. This is a tale that starts with handcuffs and ends with handshakes, proving that sometimes the most powerful lessons come from our biggest mistakes. The fluorescent lights of the military base cast long shadows across the empty corridors as the clock struck midnight. In a world where split-second decisions can mean the difference between life and death, assumptions become dangerous weapons. But what happens when those assumptions target the wrong person entirely? Officer Marcus Thompson adjusted his radio as he cruised through the quiet streets surrounding Fort Meridian. At 26, with 2 years of police work under his belt, Marcus believed he had seen it all. His muscular frame filled out his uniform with the confidence of someone who took pride in serving and protecting his community. His dark skin gleamed under the streetlights, and his sharp eyes constantly scanned for anything out of the ordinary. Unit 47. We have a report of suspicious activity at Fort Meridian, Building C, crackled the dispatcher's voice through his radio. Caller reports seeing a black male with cleaning supplies acting suspicious near the command center, possibly attempting break-in. Marcus grabbed his radio. Unit 47 responding, ETA 3 minutes. As he turned toward the base, Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Military installations were serious business, and any security threat had to be handled with extreme caution. His training kicked in automatically: assess the situation, secure the area, and detain any suspects for questioning. Meanwhile, inside Building C, Colonel James Washington pushed his mop bucket down the hallway with practiced efficiency. At 52, the distinguished African-American officer carried himself with the quiet dignity that came from 30 years of military service. His salt and pepper hair was cropped short in regulation style, and despite wearing civilian clothes and pushing cleaning equipment, his posture remained unmistakably military. James had been working late again, something that had become routine since his wife's passing 6 months ago. Rather than going home to an empty house, he often stayed at the base, sometimes until the early morning hours. Tonight he had dismissed the regular cleaning crew early so he could work in solitude, finding peace in the simple, meditative act of cleaning. It was his way of staying close to the work he loved while processing his grief. It was one of his way of finding purpose in his work he loved while processing his grief. The base's security guards knew Colonel Washington well, but they had gone home hours ago, leaving only the automated systems and periodic police patrols to monitor the facility. Marcus pulled up to the base entrance, his headlights cutting through the darkness. The gate was closed, but he could see light coming from one of the buildings deeper inside the compound. He parked and approached the fence, scanning the area with his flashlight. Through the chain-link barrier he spotted a figure moving inside Building CA. Black man pushing a cart, periodically stopping to enter different offices. From Marcus's vantage point, the scene looked exactly like what the caller had described. Someone casing the building, possibly planning a theft or worse. Marcus called for backup and found the side entrance that provided access to the building. His heart pounded as he approached, hand resting on his service weapon. In his mind, he was preventing a potential security breach, possibly even a terrorist attack on a military installation. The building was quiet except for the sound of footsteps and the occasional squeak of wheels on linoleum. Marcus followed the sounds down a long corridor, his flashlight beam dancing across motivational posters and military insignia that lined the walls. He turned a corner and there he was, a middle-aged black man in civilian clothes, methodically mopping the floor. The man's back was turned and he appeared to be wearing earbuds, completely unaware of Marcus's presence. "Police! Stop what you're doing and put your hands where I can see them." James looked up, startled. Water dripped from his mop as he slowly raised his hands, his expression more confused than frightened. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding," James said calmly, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone accustomed to command. "I'm Colonel James Washington, and I work here." Marcus kept his weapon drawn but pointed downward. Sure you do. What's a colonel doing mopping floors at midnight? Turn around slowly and put your hands behind your back. Officer, if you'll just let me show you my identification. He said, turn around now. James complied, his jaw tightening with controlled frustration. He had faced down enemy combatants in 2 wars, commanded thousands of soldiers and earned a chest full of medals, but, in this moment, he was just another suspicious black man to the young officer behind him. Marcus approached cautiously, pulling out his handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Officer Thompson, James said, reading the name tag as the handcuffs clicked into place. I'm telling you, there's been a mistake. I'm the base commander here. My identification is in my wallet. Base commander? Marcus scoffed. Right. And I'm the President of the United States. Save the stories for downtown. The handcuffs were tight, cutting into James's wrists as Marcus guided him toward the exit. As they walked past the wall of photographs near the entrance, images of base commanders throughout the years, James glanced at his own official portrait hanging prominently in the center. Officer, please, just look at the wall. But Marcus was focused on getting his suspect to the patrol car safely. He had been trained that suspects would say anything to avoid arrest, and elaborate lies were common. The idea that this janitor was actually a high-ranking military officer seemed absurd. Outside, backup units were arriving. Officer Sarah Chen, Marcus's partner, jogged over as he loaded James into the back seat. What do we have? She asked. Possible B&E at the military facility. Suspect claims he's some kind of colonel, Marcus said, shaking his head. Had him red-handed with cleaning supplies, probably planning to steal classified documents or equipment. James sat in the back seat, his dignity intact despite the circumstances. He had endured far worse treatment during his time in the service, but this felt different. This was happening in his own country, in his own workplace, by officers who were supposed to protect and serve. At the police station, the booking process began routinely. Marcus filled out his paperwork while James was photographed and fingerprinted. It wasn't until the desk sergeant began processing James's personal effects that things took an unexpected turn. Hey, Thompson, Sergeant Rodriguez called out, holding up James's wallet. You might want to take a look at this. Marcus walked over, expecting to see fake identification or stolen credit cards. Instead, he found himself staring at a military ID card with James Washington's photograph and the unmistakable designation, Colonel, U.S. Army, Base Commander, Fort Meridian. The color drained from Marcus's face. That's got to be fake. I don't think so, Rodriguez said, examining the ID under a magnifying glass. This looks legitimate, and look at this. He held up several other cards from the wallet, an American Express black card, a Veterans Affairs medical card, and a membership card for the Officers Club, all bearing James's name. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Run his name through the system. Within minutes, the computer screen displayed James Washington's military record, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, 30 years of distinguished service, current assignment as base commander at Fort Meridian. His photograph, from the official military database, matched the man sitting in their holding cell perfectly. Oh God, Marcus whispered. What have I done? Rodriguez was already reaching for his phone. I'm calling the base. This is about to become a very big problem. The next hour passed in a blur of frantic phone calls. The base security office confirmed Colonel Washington's identity. His aide-de-camp explained that the colonel often worked late, and sometimes did his own cleaning, as a way to think through problems. The base's commanding general was notified, and was reportedly not pleased with the situation. Marcus stood outside the holding cell, watching James sit calmly on the bench, still wearing handcuffs. The colonel's expression wasn't angry, it was disappointed, which somehow made Marcus feel even worse. Sir, Marcus said quietly as he unlocked the cell door. I need to remove these handcuffs. I'm very sorry. James stood and turned around, allowing Marcus to remove the restraints. Red marks circled his wrists where the metal had been too tight. "Colonel Washington, I don't know what to say. I made a terrible mistake." James rubbed his wrists and looked directly into Marcus's eyes. "Officer Thompson, may I ask you something?" "Yes, sir." "What made you think I was a criminal?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus wanted to say it was the late hour, the suspicious circumstances, the caller's report. But standing face to face with this dignified man, whose only crime had been cleaning his own workplace, Marcus realized the uncomfortable truth. "I saw a black man with cleaning supplies in a government building at midnight, and I assumed the worst." "And why do you think you made that assumption?" Marcus struggled with the answer. He had always considered himself free of prejudice. He was a black officer himself, committed to justice and equality. But in that moment of decision, some deep-seated bias had kicked in, some learned response that associated certain images with criminal behavior. The two men sat across from each other in the station's conference room. James had declined to press charges, much to the relief of everyone involved, but he had asked to speak with Marcus privately. "Tell me about yourself, Officer Thompson," James said, his tone gentle but authoritative. "I've been a police officer for 2 years. Before that, I studied criminal justice at State University. I got into this job because I wanted to make a difference in my community." "And you're African American?" "Yes, sir." "So you understand what it feels like to be judged by your appearance?" Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of the irony. "Yes, sir, I do." James leaned back in his chair. "I want to tell you why I was in that building tonight, Marcus." "May I call you Marcus?" "Of course, sir." "My wife died 6 months ago. Cancer. We were married for 28 years. James's voice softened. "Since then, I've had trouble sleeping. I often stay late at work, sometimes all night. It helps me think, helps me process the grief. Tonight I sent the regular cleaning crew home early because I wanted to be alone. I find cleaning meditative. It gives my hands something to do while my mind works through problems." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "Sir, I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you. But here's what I want you to understand. I've spent 30 years defending this country. I've been shot at, blown up, and decorated for valor. I've commanded thousands of soldiers and made decisions that affected the lives of countless people. But tonight, in that hallway, I was just another suspicious black man to you." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "Colonel, Let me finish," James said, raising a hand. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. I'm telling you this because I see something in you that reminds me of myself when I was young. You want to serve. You want to protect people. You want to make a difference. But you've been trained, we've all been trained, to see certain combinations of factors as threatening." James stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. "Do you know what the hardest part of command is, Marcus?" "No, sir." "It's learning that your first instinct isn't always right. In combat, quick decisions save lives. But in leadership and in policing, sometimes you have to fight your instincts. You have to look beyond the surface, beyond your assumptions, beyond what seems obvious." Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes. How do I fix this? How do I make sure this never happens again? James turned back to face him. "You start by understanding that this wasn't just a mistake. It was a symptom of something bigger. Implicit bias, unconscious prejudice, whatever you want to call it. It exists in all of us, even in people who look like us. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "I want to do better. I want to be better." "Then let me tell you what I've learned in 30 years of leadership. True strength isn't about being right all the time. It's about being willing to admit when you're wrong and having the courage to change. Tonight you had the power to destroy my dignity, my reputation, maybe even my career. But you also have the power to learn from this experience and become the kind of officer who sees people, really sees them, before making judgments. James reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. This has my direct number. I want you to call me next week. There's a community program I'm involved with. Police officers and military personnel working together to bridge understanding between law enforcement and the communities we serve. I think you'd be valuable to that effort. Marcus took the card with shaking hands. Why? Why would you want to help me, after what I did to you? Because I believe in redemption, Marcus. I believe people can change. And because the young officer who arrested me tonight has the potential to become the kind of leader who prevents these situations from happening to others. The weeks following the incident were a whirlwind of internal investigations, media attention, and soul-searching for Marcus. The story had leaked to local news, and suddenly everyone had an opinion about what had happened that night. Some praised Marcus for his humility and willingness to learn. Others condemned him for his initial actions. But through it all, Colonel Washington stood by him, refusing interviews that would have portrayed Marcus in a negative light. Everyone deserves a chance at redemption, James told reporters. Officer Thompson made a mistake, but his response to that mistake is what defines his character. Marcus threw himself into learning. He read books on implicit bias, attended workshops on cultural sensitivity, and spent hours in conversation with community leaders from different backgrounds. He discovered that his experience wasn't unique. Countless officers had similar stories of assumptions gone wrong, but few had the opportunity to confront the consequences so directly. One evening, as Marcus sat in his apartment reviewing training materials, his phone rang. It was James. Marcus, I have a proposition for you. There's a young soldier on my base, Private Maria Santos. She's been having some trouble with local law enforcement. Stopped 3 times in 2 weeks while driving to and from work. She's losing faith in the system, and I'm worried about her future in the military. Would you be willing to meet with her? But without hesitation, Marcus agreed. The next day, he found himself sitting across from a 20-year-old Latina soldier, whose eyes held the same mixture of hurt and anger he had seen in James's face that night. "Why should I trust you?" Maria asked bluntly. "You're just another cop who sees what he wants to see." Marcus felt the sting of her words, but recognized the pain behind them. "You're right to be angry. I can't speak for those other officers, but I can tell you that I've learned something important. Being wrong doesn't make you a bad person, but refusing to change after you've been wrong, that's when you become part of the problem." Over the next hour, Marcus shared his story with Maria, holding nothing back. He described the shame he felt, the sleepless nights, and the long journey toward understanding his own biases. Maria listened, her defensive posture gradually softening. "So what changed?" she asked finally. "I met a man who chose to see my potential instead of just my mistake. Colonel Washington could have destroyed my career with a single phone call, but instead he invested in my growth. Now, I want to pay that forward." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "I just want to serve my country without being treated like a criminal." "You deserve that," Marcus said firmly, "and I want to help make that possible." 3 months later, Marcus stood before a room full of police recruits, sharing his story. The humiliation had been painful, but the growth that followed had been transformative. He had become an advocate for bias training, a mentor for young officers, and a bridge between law enforcement and the military community. Colonel Washington sat in the back of the room, nodding approvingly as Marcus concluded his presentation. Next to him sat Private Santos, now promoted to specialist, who had become an unofficial liaison between the base and local police. "The man I arrested that night became one of my greatest teachers," Marcus told the recruits. "He showed me that true leadership means having the courage to confront your own prejudices and the wisdom to turn your mistakes into opportunities to serve others better." After the presentation, Marcus, James, and Maria walked out together, an unlikely trio, bound by a shared commitment to change. "How many recruits have gone through the program now?" James asked. "Over 200, Marcus replied proudly. And we're seeing real results. Complaints against officers are down 30%, and community trust scores have improved significantly. Maria smiled. My little brother wants to be a police officer now. He says he wants to be like Officer Marcus, someone who protects everyone fairly. The comment hit Marcus deeply. 6 months ago he had been part of the problem. Now he was inspiring the next generation to be part of the solution. How are you doing with everything? James asked as they reached their cars. Better every day, sir. That program you recommended has been incredible. I'm learning to see situations differently, to ask more questions before making assumptions. And your partner, Officer Chen? She's been great. She's keeping me accountable, making sure I pause and think through situations more carefully. The whole department has been supportive, actually. Everyone wants to do better. James smiled. You know, Marcus, that night was one of the worst experiences of my life. But it led to one of the most important conversations I've ever had. Sometimes our biggest failures become our greatest opportunities to grow. Maria nodded. My abuela always said that the strongest steel goes through the hottest fire. Maybe that's what happened to all of us. As they reached their cars, James turned to Marcus one final time. Remember what I told you about true strength? Yes, sir. It's not about being right all the time. It's about admitting when you're wrong and having the courage to change. Exactly. And you've shown that courage. Keep using it to make a difference. Marcus looked at his two friends, the colonel who had shown him grace and the soldier who had learned to trust again. They represented something beautiful, the possibility that broken relationships could be rebuilt stronger than before. The story of Officer Marcus Thompson and Colonel James Washington spread throughout the law enforcement community, becoming a powerful example of how mistakes can become catalysts for positive change. Their friendship, born from a misunderstanding, grew into a partnership that touched countless lives. Marcus went on to become a sergeant, specializing in community relations and bias training. He never forgot the lesson learned that night, that behind every assumption lies a human being with a story worth hearing. James continued his distinguished career, eventually retiring as a general, but he always remembered the young officer who had the humility to learn from his mistake and the courage to become better. Their story reminds us that judgment and prejudice can strike anyone, anywhere, even when we least expect it. But it also shows us that redemption is possible when we're willing to look beyond the surface, to see the humanity in each other, and to turn our failures into opportunities for growth. The next time you find yourself making a quick judgment about someone based on appearances, remember the night a cop arrested a janitor who turned out to be a base commander. Remember that true wisdom comes not from being right, but from being willing to be wrong, and learning from the experience. What assumptions are you carrying? What judgments might you need to reconsider? The person standing next to you in line, walking down your street or working in your building, might have a story that would completely change how you see them. If this story moved you, if it challenged you to think differently about assumptions and prejudice, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Subscribe for more stories that inspire change and challenge us to be better. And in the comments below, tell us about a time when your assumptions were wrong. Because that's how we learn and grow together. Remember, behind every uniform, every job title, every appearance, there's a human being with dreams, struggles, and a story worth knowing. The question is, are you willing to look beyond the surface to see it?